The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when Sheriff Elias Crawford finally reached the hollow. The road had turned to a river of mud, every hoofprint swallowed by the swampy earth. Above him, black crows circled like patient jurors waiting for a verdict. The air smelled of rot, iron and pine, the scent that always came before he found a body. At the center of Devil's Den, hollow, stood the old Blackwood cabin, a relic of hand-hewn timber and superstition. The windows were sealed with planks from the inside, and a faded cross was carved into the front door, not for decoration, but warning. Crawford had followed the trail for months, missing travelers, abandoned horses, men who vanished after visiting the twins, Mercy and Temperance Blackwood, 7 feet tall, pale as moonlight, and rumored to be born under a blood moon. To some, they were healers. To others, witches who spoke to the roots of the mountains themselves. But tonight, Crawford wasn't chasing folklore. He was chasing proof. As his deputies pried up the floorboards, the cabin exhaled a smell that made their eyes sting. Beneath the boards, they found it, a concealed root cellar. The earth packed tight with bones and glass jars, filled with herbs and unrecognizable things floating in amber liquid. The sheriff held his lantern over the entrance. The flame flickered as if afraid to burn. "Bring the rope," he muttered. The first deputy descended, his boots sinking into mud that wasn't just mud. When he screamed, everyone knew the truth they had come for. Down there lay Declan Murphy's, or what was left of him. Bound wrists. Rope burns deep enough to show bone. The smell of rot, mixed with sage and valerian. A body that had been starved, cut and prepared, not buried but preserved. As if the twins meant to return to him later, around the corpse. Symbols had been drawn into the dirt, spiraling out from the center. Animal bones, a half-burned candle, and a journal written in a woman's delicate hand, every page describing the alignment of spirit and flesh. Sheriff Crawford read the first line aloud. "The vessel must be purified through hunger. The body empties so the spirit may enter." The deputies crossed themselves. Crawford didn't. He just closed the journal and whispered, "We found our missing boy, but he hadn't found everything." In the far corner of the cellar, buried beneath a pile of straw, they uncovered small bones, too small for an adult, infant bones, wrapped in cloth embroidered with initials, MB and TB. The sheriff looked back toward the ladder. "Their mother's initials," he said quietly. Silence filled the cellar, broken only by water dripping from the ceiling. It wasn't just a crime scene. It was a temple. Crawford ordered the site sealed, the evidence packed, and the deputies kept from drinking the cabin's water. He could feel something wrong in the air, a heaviness, like the land itself was watching. As they left the hollow that night, lightning flashed across the ridge, and for a moment, the sheriff thought he saw 2 women standing at the tree line, tall, still, watching. He blinked, and they were gone. Back in town, the story spread faster than the storm. Some said the twins were healers misunderstood by ignorant men. Others said they were witches who had sold their souls for power. But Crawford knew only one thing. The evidence in that cellar was too organized, too methodical, to belong to madness alone. He'd seen killers before, but none who wrote their own scripture. He sat at his desk that night, lantern low, Declan Murphy's name echoing in his thoughts. And in the silence, he heard it, a faint whisper as though from under the floorboards. He wasn't ready. Crawford looked up sharply, his hand on his revolver, but the office was empty. Only the wind moving through the cracks of the window pane. He leaned back, rubbed his temples, and spoke as if to the dark itself. "Mercy, Temperance, whatever you're doing out there in them woods, it ends now. Then, breaking the heavy tone for a brief breath, he turned to you, the listener. "Where are you watching from tonight? It's past midnight here, and this mountain wind still sounds like crying sometimes. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe, because this story's about to crawl deeper into a place the light forgot." And with that, the hollow went quiet, waiting for the next scream. The morning after the discovery, the town of Marrow's Creek woke to silence, the kind of silence that feels alive, like it's holding its breath. Every door stayed shut, every curtain drawn. Only the church bell dared to break the quiet, tolling slow and heavy, as if mourning something it couldn't name. Sheriff Crawford hadn't slept. The storm had left his office damp, and the air thick with mildew and paper dust. Declan Murphy's journal lay open on his desk, except it wasn't his handwriting. The pages weren't his words at all. They were written by one of the twins. The ink strokes were too elegant, too deliberate. Each sentence looked like a ritual. The spirit must enter through hunger. The flesh must tremble before release. He flipped another page. The chosen man must die pure, unburdened by the world's noise. It wasn't murder they were committing, it was ceremony. Crawford rubbed his eyes, thinking back to the cellar. The smell still clung to his clothes, no matter how many times he'd washed. His deputy, Sam Heller, had refused to come back to the station, muttering that he'd seen something moving under the dirt that night. By noon, a crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office. Mothers with missing sons, wives holding faded portraits, and an old preacher who claimed the twins were children of the storm, born from a pact made long ago. Crawford didn't believe in curses, but he couldn't shake the memory of that whisper in his office, the one that said he wasn't ready. That night he returned to the hollow, alone. The rain had stopped, but the mist was thicker, curling through the trees like smoke. The Blackwood cabin still stood silent, its roof sagging under the weight of age. Crawford's lantern light bounced off the doorframe, and for a moment he saw fresh carvings, symbols that hadn't been there before. He stepped closer. They were circles within circles, drawn with ash and something darker, maybe blood. And in the center, carved deep enough to splinter the wood, were 3 words: "The vessel returns." Crawford's breath fogged the glass of his lantern. "You're taunting me now," he muttered. Inside, everything was just as they'd left it. Overturned chairs, broken jars, the faint hum of flies. But the cellar door was open. He hesitated. The lantern flame wavered as if warning him. Still he descended. The air was colder below. The symbols had been redrawn in the dirt, fresher, darker. And there, where Declan Murphy's body had been, something new was lying. A deer carcass, flayed open, organs arranged carefully in a circle. The same pattern as before. But this time there was a name written in chalk on the wall. Elias. His name. He stumbled back, hand on his revolver. Then he heard it, a low, wet breathing sound coming from the shadows behind him. He turned the lantern. Nothing, only the whisper of wind moving through the roots. But then, faint footsteps above. Slow, barefoot. Someone was in the cabin. Crawford climbed up fast, revolver drawn, heart thudding. The moment he pushed the trapdoor open, he saw it. A figure at the far end of the room. Facing the window, tall, thin, pale hair trailing down to the waist. "Mercy Blackwood," he said, voice shaking. The figure didn't move. "You're under arrest for murder." Still nothing. He took a step forward, and the figure finally turned. But what he saw wasn't a living woman. It was a wax figure, perfectly sculpted, eyes made of polished stone, lips stitched shut with black thread, and around its neck hung a necklace made of teeth. Crawford's lantern flickered again, and that's when he saw the second one. Another figure. Behind him, this one moved. He fired once. The sound tore through the cabin, echoing off the hills. But when the smoke cleared, the figure was gone. Only the smell remained, lavender and decay. He ran out into the yard, panting, scanning the trees. The mist had thickened again, and through it faint laughter drifted, soft, distant, like two voices overlapping. Then silence. Crawford lowered his gun. His hand trembled, and for the first time in 20 years, he whispered a prayer. He didn't know it then, but the twins weren't hiding. They were preparing. The ritual wasn't finished. It had only begun. 3 days after that night in the cabin, the people of Marrow's Creek stopped sleeping. The air grew heavier. Candles wouldn't stay lit. The town's dogs went missing. And the preacher's wife started waking up outside her house with her feet covered in mud. Though she swore she'd locked the doors, Sheriff Crawford hadn't spoken a word since the cellar incident. He sat in his office, hat pulled low, staring at that chalk name, Elias. Each hour the same sound returned, a faint tapping at the window, like a fingernail against glass. But whenever he looked, nothing was there. On the 4th day, a letter arrived. No return address. The handwriting was old-fashioned, careful. Inside was a single sheet of parchment. It read, "The vessel will find its voice when the mountain stops breathing. Come alone." At the bottom, a seal pressed in black wax. 2 intertwined snakes. He knew exactly where he had to go. By dusk, Crawford was back at the hollow, lantern in hand. The fog rolled low, hugging the earth like smoke from a dying fire. The air was colder than before, unnaturally cold. Even the crickets were silent. The cabin stood exactly as he'd left it, yet something was different. The roofline seemed wrong, the angles sharper, as if the whole structure had shifted in the dark. Inside, the cellar door stood open again, waiting. He descended slowly. Each step creaked like a whisper, and when he reached the bottom, the sight stopped him cold. The deer carcass was gone. In its place lay a human shape, covered in a linen cloth, glowing faintly under the lantern light. Around it a ring of candles burned steady, their flames perfectly still. He pulled the cloth back. Declan Murphy, but the skin was wrong, stretched, grey, and dry as bark. The eyes had been replaced with smooth river stones, and on his chest, written in black ash, "They return through you." Crawford stumbled backward, his boots slipping in the mud. Then he heard it, that sound again, 2 voices humming softly behind him. He turned. There they were, Mercy and Mara Blackwood, identical, ageless, their hair white as moonlight, their eyes hollow as old wells. They didn't speak. They just stared, as if measuring him. "You should have stayed away," he whispered. Mercy smiled faintly. "We waited, Sheriff. You brought the voice." Mara stepped closer, dragging her fingers through the dirt. "Every man thinks he hunts us. None see they were chosen." He raised his gun. "You're both under arrest." They laughed, soft, too soft. And then everything changed. The candles flared and the ground began to breathe. The dirt rose and fell like the chest of something sleeping beneath. From the walls, black veins began to spread, roots twisting, pulsing. The air reeked of blood and lavender. "The mountain remembers," Mercy whispered. "And tonight it takes its voice back," Crawford fired. Once, twice, both bullets struck the wall, vanishing into the dark. The twins didn't move. They stepped closer in perfect rhythm, until the lantern light flickered across their faces, revealing something crawling beneath their skin. It wasn't flesh anymore. It was soil, living, moving soil. He ran, up the stairs, through the cabin, out into the trees. The mist swallowed him whole, and the sound of their humming followed, echoing from every direction. By the time he reached town, his lantern had burned out, his voice gone hoarse from shouting. No one came to the windows. No one answered his knocking. Marrow's Creek was silent, every house empty. Inside the church the pews were overturned, the altar drenched in wax and blood. and on the walls, drawn in ash, were dozens of circles, each one with a name inside. His name appeared again. Only this time it wasn't Elias Crawford, it was Elias Blackwood. He dropped the lantern and stumbled back, shaking his head. No, that's not my name. But deep down, something inside him whispered, yes, it is. He had been dreaming of the twins long before the murders. He remembered faces he'd never seen, voices he'd never heard, and a smell, lavender and dirt, that had followed him his whole life. The town wasn't cursed by the Blackwoods. The town was the Blackwoods. Every generation they returned. Different names, same blood, and this time Elias Crawford was their chosen vessel. Elias Crawford didn't sleep that night. He sat inside the church, his lantern flickering low, staring at that name written in ash, Elias Blackwood. Outside, the fog pressed against the stained glass like something alive, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. The longer he stared at the writing, the more the letters began to move, slowly, like worms beneath the surface of skin. He whispered to himself, "They're dead. I buried them. They can't be—" But he stopped mid-sentence, because from behind the altar he heard breathing. He raised his lantern and stepped closer. The sound grew louder, wet, strained. He moved the altar cloth aside, and there it was, a trapdoor, old, nailed shut with iron spikes that looked centuries old. His hands trembled as he pried them loose. The air that rose from below wasn't like air at all. It was memory. It smelled of lavender, of damp soil, and of something far older than decay. When he descended, the stone steps spiraled downward for what felt like miles. Every few feet he saw carvings, women's faces etched into the wall, their eyes hollow, their mouths sewn shut. Beneath each face, a name: Mercy, Mara, Ada, Ruth, Esther, generations of them. At the bottom stood a chamber built entirely of bones, human bones. In the center, a black pool, perfectly still, reflecting nothing. He stepped closer, and that's when he saw it. His reflection in the water. But not his reflection. The man staring back had older eyes, wilder, the same face but wrong. Skin stretched too tight, eyes too knowing. And then the reflection spoke. "You thought you were their hunter." Elias froze. "You were their promise." He stumbled back, shaking his head. No, I'm not one of you." From the shadows behind him a voice whispered, "You are what we made you." He turned. Mercy and Mara stood in the doorway. Their white dresses were soaked with soil and something darker. Their faces no longer human, split open like bark, revealing veins of light pulsing underneath. Mara stepped forward. "When the Blackwood line dies, the land dies. You were born to carry it forward." Elias's breathing quickened. "You think I'll let you turn me into whatever you are?" Mercy tilted her head, her tone almost tender. "You already are." And then she pointed toward his reflection. It was changing, bones cracking, jaw distorting, eyes turning the same colorless white as theirs. He dropped to his knees, screaming as memories that weren't his flooded in. Old prayers, women's voices, firelight, blood dripping onto stone. He saw the first ritual, hundreds of years ago, when the Blackwoods settled the hollow. They'd fled persecution for their sacred rites. They believed salvation didn't come from heaven, it came from the womb. The women were vessels for rebirth, carriers of ancestral souls. When men tried to silence them, they buried those men alive in the mountain, feeding them to the earth so the next generation could grow stronger. But the mountain learned hunger. It demanded more. So the women began offering their own blood, birthing sons who carried half the spirit of the land and half the curse of man. Elias saw himself, generation after generation, reborn through the same soil, wearing new names, serving the same fate. You cannot escape your making, Mara whispered. Each time you find us, each time we show you. He raised his gun again, hands shaking. If I kill myself, it ends here. Mercy smiled, her voice calm. Death is just the door we built for you. The lantern light flickered and went out. In the dark, he heard the sound of water shifting. Then something cold touched his wrist, a hand. The next moment, he was pulled under. The pool swallowed him whole. Silence. When he opened his eyes again, he wasn't in the church. He was back at the cabin, but everything was new. The boards were unrotted. The air smelled of spring. Outside, the hills were alive with wildflowers. He looked at his hands, clean, strong, unfamiliar. A woman's voice called from outside, "Elias, breakfast is ready." He turned toward the sound. Mercy stood there, smiling, human again, her dress fresh and white. Behind her, a second figure, Mara, rocking a cradle. He stumbled backward, shaking his head. What year is this?" Mercy's eyes softened. "It's always the beginning, love. The hollow remembers." He looked down at the table. A family Bible lay open, and on the inside cover, in neat handwriting, it read, "The Book of the Blackwood Line, Reborn, 1886. Elias dropped the book, heart pounding, because underneath that name, written in new ink, was a third name, his own. Elias Blackwood, 1886, no death date, just a dash. The ink was still wet. When dawn came over Devil's Den Hollow, the mist hung low, as if the mountain itself refused to reveal what had happened during the longest night of the year. Sheriff Crawford rode into the clearing where the Blackwood cabin once stood. The air was thick with the scent of burned wood, gunpowder, and something older, the lingering residue of rituals that had turned human faith into something monstrous. Inside the smoldering ruins, he found the twins' ritual implements laid out as if still awaiting their final ceremony. The walls, half collapsed, were blackened with soot, yet the floor retained the faint circular markings drawn from ash and herbs. Mercy's journal survived the flames, sealed in a tin box beneath a loose floorboard, its pages filled with her calm, precise handwriting. Every word revealed the twins' descent into delusion. It documented 13 years of killings, the methods, the ceremonies, the reasons. No remorse, no doubt, just the chilling assurance that what they had done was necessary. Crawford sat there for hours, reading by the grey light seeping through broken beams. The journal told not only of murder, but of belief so absolute that it stripped away humanity. The twins had convinced themselves they were chosen, instruments of a divine balance, offering human life to preserve something ancient and unseen. Crawford's hands trembled as he realized that every missing person, every family broken by grief, had been catalogued in those pages like data in a ledger. By the time the sheriff reached the final entry, his vision blurred. Mercy had written, "The mountain feeds upon silence. The blood only awakens what sleeps beneath it." Was enough to make even the most rational man feel the weight of something beyond comprehension. The months that followed saw Silas Murphy stand. Trial for the deaths of the Blackwood twins. But the court proceedings felt less like justice and more like a public exorcism. The townspeople, once whispering and fearful, now came forward with trembling testimonies. Every family had known something. Strange herbs purchased in bulk, animals vanishing, travelers seen going toward the cabin but never returning. Their silence had been their sin, and the courtroom was their penance. When Mercy's journal was read aloud, the room grew silent. People wept openly. The judge's gavel trembled in his hand. Each page was a window into a mind untouched by guilt. The twins had viewed their victims as vessels, their own wombs as gateways for unnatural birth, and their home as sacred ground. It was the coldness of their logic, not the brutality of their actions, that horrified everyone most. Murphy was sentenced to 5 years for manslaughter. But no one truly believed he had done wrong. Within 18 months he was released. He returned to his farm, older, quieter, carrying the weight of what he had done and what he had stopped. The Blackwood cabin was burned to its foundation by local men. The flames rose like a pillar against the night sky, visible from every settlement in the valley. It was said that the fire burned too hot for too long, as if the earth itself wanted to erase their memory. By morning, only ash and stone remained. Over the following years, Devil's Den Hollow changed names. People called it Dead Women's Den. Travelers avoided it. Children grew up hearing stories about the cursed sisters who prayed to things that lived beneath the soil. And though nature reclaimed the land, vines, moss, and roots covering what once was human madness, the place never truly felt alive again. By 1885, a railroad crew stumbled upon the ruins. Beneath the roots and dirt, they unearthed a letter sealed inside a rusted tin. It was written by one of the twins' last victims, Declan Murphy. His words were desperate yet lucid. He had realized too late what they were. He described hearing voices not from above, but from the earth itself. He wrote of chanting that makes the walls breathe. He begged whoever found the letter to bury the mountain with silence. That letter became the final piece of the story, the echo of a voice that refused to vanish. The county preserved it as evidence, though most wished it had remained buried. In time, Sheriff Crawford's reports were archived. Scholars, preachers, and even psychologists studied the Blackwood case for decades. Some called it the product of hysteria, others possession. But those who lived in the mountains never tried to explain it. They just warned travelers never to stay long in Devil's Den Hollow, because every few winters, when the solstice moon rose white over the trees, strange patterns appeared again in the frost. Circles, just like the ones Mercy drew, and when the wind passed through the hollow at night, it didn't sound like wind at all. It sounded like whispering in her voice.